Hello everyone, welcome back to my very special interview with legend historian activist Jim Eigo. In the second part of this interview, Jim is going to discuss what self-care looks like at age 73, as well as the impact of the Trump administration's rollbacks on so much of the progress Jim and his colleagues made in the 80s and 90s. Thank you for watching.
The good thing is I think I'm more comfortable in my skin than I've ever been. I'm 73 and I'm not on one medicine. When I had to recently change from Aetna, which was taking care of my Medicare plan, they said, "You're on no medicines? How can that be? You're 73. And I said, well, I had a procedure last summer which took me off of the one, and it was successful, and it took me off of the one medicine I was on." That's how it can be. If you want to count vitamin D, my general practitioner wanted me on vitamin D because my levels were very low. That's the one thing I'm on.
And you mentioned you do work out every day.
I work out
exercise
every day.
Is there a certain nutrition or diet you abide by?
I've been vegetarian since 74.
74. Wow. Do you think that's
before
contributed?
most of you?
Has that contributed to?
Yes,
your
it doesn't
health?
necessarily. I once said that to a trainer, and he said, half of my vegetarians eat so much carbs that they're just taking in too much sugar, and their calorie intake is too high. And I am not.
Yeah.
I mentioned someone who previously sat in this position is the great writer and AIDS activist, Vicky Noe.
Yeah.
And Vicky has a big sweet tooth, and I am just the opposite.
Yeah.
And the older I get, the idea of certain things like cotton candy is enough almost to make me sick to my stomach, just the thought. So I'm a vegetarian who actually eats lots of fruits and vegetables.
Wow.
And because I'm not vegan, that has allowed me to do things like yogurt and cheese. And we've found out that for some reason, with both yogurt, but particularly cheese, seems to be a marker for longevity, whereas eating whole milk is not. And to the best of my knowledge, they're not fully sure of that. It might be the fermenting that goes on with both yogurt and cheese, so that even whole milk, yogurt, and cheese seems to be tied to longevity. So yeah, and if I read that turmeric is good for you,
I use that.
You can be sure that but I've never been one to do supplements until like I said, vitamin D, and that's only because my general practitioner insisted. But I do a lot of turmeric. It's now in I do a lentil meal, I do a beet meal, and let's face it, I've gone to lentil and beets because I've read good things about them. But all the turmeric I use is in the meals that I do for myself.
How about a mental health or spiritual process? Has that ever been part of your self-care?
Yes, but it's been, what do I want to say, a lay self-process? I mentioned that I had a medical procedure last year in 2016, and I remember it because it's the same year, 65, that I went on to Medicare. So I changed the general practitioner, but also even before I saw my general practitioner, I was hit with a urinary tract infection, and it wound up to have been a result of enlarged prostate. The procedure I had last year is an almost sci-fi procedure where they preserve what they urologists call the capsule of the prostate, but go inside and dismantle up to 80% of it, and it passes out through the urethra. It sounds sci-fi, and because I was 72 at the time, I had to get I had to go through a bunch of coronary diagnostics, because they don't like to do a 4.5 hour operation on people that old, but I do. I mentioned I go to the gym daily, but every other day is biking for half an hour.
Wow.
So I think that strengthens my.
And is that good for the mind? Is it?
I think it.
Good.
And I think the writing is good for the mind.
Yeah.
And I think I've always had an analytical mind. Everything, people look at me and say, "Oh, your memory is so good." And I think, no, it's because when things happen that are important to me, I tend to sit down and think about them and analyze them. And I think once you put that, it's almost like you've got a double memory of the important thing you went through, plus you're contemplating it. But I started to say, when I did find that I went to the internet to do a lot of basics on how to meditate and lots of breathing exercises and important breathing exercises that I continue to this day, because I found them really helpful with anxious moments. And let's face it, we have been through a lot the last several years.
Yeah.
You know, it's been the decade of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Even when he was out of office, you know.
So do breathing and meditation assist in dealing with some of what we're looking at today?
I think so.
Okay.
But I think also having a writing practice.
Yeah.
I never know how much to talk about myself, but in part this is it. For 10 years, before I retired in 2016, all through the time I was working with my parents, the last several years that I was working as the editor, Mavini Media Group was the name of our group, and the two magazines I edited were in a part of a big umbrella group of both gay, straight magazines, and not all of them were pornographic, but they shrank to the pornographic magazines as online ate so much out of the audience for magazines that were actually on paper. But you know, all through that time, I had ideas for 3 full-length plays. And I was smart enough that whenever I had an idea for it, I had computer files and I put it in that. I never thought I would have a life that would allow me to get back to doing any of it. But both retiring and having a COVID epidemic and lockdown, which was not good for very much, but it was good for a writing practice if you were in a mental health state that you could. I know a lot of writers who were too distracted to continue writing.
Yeah.
It was just the opposite. I had a writing practice at home. I would go to Tompkins Square Park, which is just a block below my apartment, and write out there. There's a little annex where they have the monument to all those young German children who died in the General Slocum ferry sinking in the late 1800s. Something like 140 children died. They were going to, but, so, not to be a downer, it's a quiet part of the park, and I would go there. So I have written final drafts to not just those 3 plays, but in ancient Greek tragedies, you would write 3 tragedies and top it off with a short, lighter, what was called a satyr play, S-A-T-Y-R, because the choruses were all satyrs who were half men, half goats, and they ran around with huge phalluses. And yet, the rules were the rules of tragedy, and they showed the 3 tragedies and the satyr play in one day, which was a communal exercise in which all of Athenian free men, so it was only males, who were not slaves, and there were an awful lot of slaves, or foreigners who were living legally, but not born Athenians. So it was in some ways both a perfect democracy and imperfect for all those. But that was the birthplace for Western theater.
Wow.
I have written the drafts to all of them. One has had a reading, perfected, and written a satyr play for it, which I had not thought of. So that's Jim in his personal life. I'm also trying to sit up so I can see you. Or you can see me, because I can't see you at all. I will always be eternally grateful that I was able to return to the playwriting career for which I got 2 degrees and came to the East Village in 1978 because that was the hotbed of experimental theater, which was what I was interested in. And wound up seeing a lot of it, but wound up just a few years later making AIDS activism and the career that I had as an AIDS, what I think of as AIDS health work.
Yeah.
Not my full-time job. So
You're so amazing.
I feel the word blessed is overused, but I do feel blessed for having not only the AIDS career I had, but also the sexual health porn career I had for 8 years. And then, although it was difficult, I have to say, there were also many gratifying moments in caring for my father all those years, who, thank God, was the sweetest, kindest straight man I ever met. So thank God for that. There was nothing. And then going back to having the writing practice at a time I think I was finally mature enough to be able to take enough time to do something for myself.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about putting all of this into a book about your life and all of these different experiences?
A lot of people have told me that I should. And early in my Facebook career, the 1911 to 1913, 14,
20?
I used Twitter a lot with the Active Alumni website, because it was just when the first generation of AIDS activists was waking up to the fact that's not well documented.
Yeah.
So a lot of us used and a lot of the writing I did for that were really like 1,000-word essays about this event, this person, this time within the first 5 years of ACT UP. And then even later since then, Alexis Danzig is an ACT UP member from the first generation, because her a proud lesbian herself, her father was a gay guy who wound up dying of AIDS. That's what drove her to act up when she was very young. So I knew her from then, but I knew her from my return, and she's still one of the driving forces in Rise and Resist. For those of you who follow activism, that's one of the most splendid adversarial activist groups that's working right now. She frequently writes, and I frequently still respond to her when it engages history or some of the things we talk about. The history of my generation of gay guys hasn't really been written because Stonewall has been written about.
Right.
And we benefited from Stonewall, but our psyches were shaped by pre-Stonewall.
Right.
And so it was that.
So that's a strong argument to write your book.
And it also might explain why I was able to learn so much from people like Larry Kramer, or Carl Sigman was someone who was in my affinity group. Wave 3 was my affinity group with an ACT UP. The affinity groups were the small groups of usually around 12 to 14 people who would all get arrested together. And so you would have each other's backs, and we would usually have someone outside the group and then a legal observer. Carl Sigman was arrested for loitering in a gay men's room.
Mm-hmm.
He was maybe 16 years older than I. Larry was from the late 30s. I was born 51. So they were like a half a generation. I learned so much from them, but it's because I respected what they went through. What they went through. I mean, the arrests and the harassment, and yet they persisted. And then transitioned after Stonewall to being great loudmouth activists. So I learned a lot from them, from how do you transition from having had your psyche shaped by pre-Stonewall, but having all the benefits of Stonewall, because within 1 year of Stonewall, we had a huge, I was on the West Coast getting my degrees at the time, but here in New York, the first year anniversary, that march was huge and covered internationally, and we still have wonderful videotapes and still photographs from that time. So you get some idea of Stonewall may sometimes get too much credit. I can understand how maybe some of the gay people who survived the time might think, I was around, why don't they look at me? And I assure you, I, in looking back, have been inspired by you. But part of the reason why Stonewall really was a cry that was heard around the world. So we have to give it that, even though I want to give all the other people who are doing really important work in keeping gay and lesbian culture alive before Stonewall all the props. Yeah. Because having grown up as I did, I have some idea of how the cards were stacked against you.
Yeah. So again, I think your experiences, some of which we've only just a small portion of which we just talked about, but there's so much more.
I see.
You have so much to share.
Yeah. Well,
that's you point out even more benefit today and what we're looking at today. Your history, your experiences, what you've witnessed, and your insights, I think, are very relevant to what we're looking at today.
I'm hoping that some of the more narrow experiences, the ones that involve one-on-one, the ones that involve small communities of action, offer some sort of a model for getting ourselves out of the hole we are in right now.
So what would you say to people watching this, or people who have just been feeling very, very overwhelmed so far during the Trump administration and don't know what to do or don't know how to be part of the change we want to see? What would you tell them, or how would you guide them?
Well, I don't know if I'm the best one to, because the first thing I would say to you, and this is what I said jokingly in a comment on Facebook to Alexis a few weeks ago, was that since the beginning of Act Up, I have always said the first rule of an activist has to be take care of yourself, because you cannot take care of anyone else if you're not there and functioning and a responding being that can actually look at someone and empathize and try and understand what we're communicating at so many levels that humans communicate at. And I ended with the joke that with this last crisis, I'm finally mature enough to take my own advice.
Mm-hmm. But for people that are...
So I am taking my own advice.
Good. Do you think in this day and age that the showing up for protest, going down, marching, holding up signs, going to Teslas, do you think that's helpful? Do you think that's impactful today?
I think it's impactful in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
In early Act Up, we just had to make the nightly news.
Uh-huh.
And it's a different thing. We knew how to target it, and we knew when we were successful. We just turned on the TV, and if we made the nightly news, I remember the first time that I was arrested, we retired to Woody's, which was a restaurant in the West Village where a lot of Act Up social gatherings went. And we went there, and in the nightly news, we saw them, and they said that we backed up traffic for 15 miles into New Jersey. And that was my affinity group that did it, because they weren't arresting people on Wall Street anymore, because they realized we wanted to get arrested. The more they got arrested, the more snafu there was. So we went over in front of Trinity Church, and we fanned across Trinity and Rector, and we were the ones that were the nightmare for them, because nothing could get into the city anymore.
Do you think those strategies are helpful today?
I think they might be helpful, but I think they have to constantly be looked at, because in some ways they're more effective. Because even if nightly news doesn't take it up, if you're documenting yourself, you can send it around the world. A lot of those Tesla demos have been fun and funny, and they've certainly gotten under Elon Musk's skin.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to say what I always say to the Act Up people early on. And this then, I think, was the only other time where the pressure was what we're getting right now, because what Trump and Musk want to do is really so extreme. It really does want to destroy the United States government as we have known it and replace democracy with a high-tech oligarchy. That is what it wants to do. The pressure we felt at the beginning of our work was the body count. You have to realize in 87, and I've said this before, late 86 and early 87 was when I got my first HIV test. It took forever to get the results. It took 2 weeks normally. But I was part of a blood cohort that was getting run by Cornell. It's now Cornell Weill, but it used to be Cornell New York Hospital. So I knew I was HIV negative, and I am HIV negative now. And I really probably should mention that, since with the stories I'm giving, it sometimes important. And so those of us who were HIV negative, I think, felt a certain kind of responsibility because so many people who were HIV positive only knew it when they came down with symptomatic disease, usually some type of opportunistic infection or cancer that frequently would lay them up, at least for a while. And the body count was growing and growing and growing and growing. And we had only a year before gotten the HIV test to realize, oh my God, for every person who's symptomatic, we may have 10 who are asymptomatic. So what will the body count be if AIDS remains a death sentence? And then, oh my God, injection drug users, their partners and kids are having the same thing. And oh my God, overseas, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, heterosexual sex is highly transmissible. So it's like, it was surreal, it felt medieval. It really felt like the medieval plague where, you had to put your cross on the door and hope the angel of death didn't knock on your door. It felt so random. And that's maybe why we were so pro-science, is we wanted to get real answers. But also, I'm sorry for these long answers, but that meant the body count was doubling and trebling and quadrupling every year. And it's almost, New York, we wiped out Health and Hospitals Corporation. I mentioned Donald Milvan with Beth Israel. She had first seen all of the lymphadenopathy. Beth Israel opened an AIDS ward, which was wonderful. It was brilliant. Everyone who was a nurse there or any other care practitioner, a doctor there, wanted to be there. But by God, Beth Israel otherwise was hell. The crack epidemic had hit by 87. And in the East Village, Beth Israel's emergency room was hell. You felt like you were in a country that had no healthcare system, that was living by its bootstraps, that had nothing. You literally would sometimes wait 3 or 4 days on a gurney, even if you were very sick, before you got a room. Then you might get a room in regular Beth Israel, but we were very successful in getting AIDS activists into this AIDS ward. But it was crazy. And so that body count and the fact that we had taxed the healthcare system in New York so badly that it was about to collapse. That gives you some idea of why the responsible people at Centers for Disease Control and Food and Drug Administration and National Institute for Health welcomed us in. Because they knew that we who were up to our necks in this, who were literally having friends drop in the street. Those of us who were in performing arts were having our actors, dancers, playwrights, directors, and audience taken away from us. When they weren't taken out of commission, they died. in their first bout. They presented with AIDS and they died within a few days. And that was, most of the diagnoses until 85 or so, when in New York, people who were connected had things like prophylactic drugs for the pneumonia that was the major killer. Yeah. So, see, NIH would send people to New York AIDS doctors saying, why aren't your people dying as fast as they are elsewhere? They say, we put them on this, we put them on this, and certainly if you put them on low-dose Bactrim and low-dose high-dose Bactrim fought the pneumonia when you got it. If you keep them on really low dose, they don't get it. Yeah. And if that's the biggest killer of people with AIDS, can you imagine how many people you can save? So that gives you some idea of what a close-knit community did. Yeah. The word went out. Amazing. The word went out through little publications, news sheets in the community, and spreading word. And you knew these are the 10 doctors in New York who know what they're doing. 2 of them were active members who died of AIDS within the first 2 years of AIDS because they had AIDS too. But they were the people who were saving people from AIDS. Yeah. Barry Gingell was the name of the person who NIH came to New York to investigate. He once called me up and said, Jim, today you have to be Barry Gingell. I said, Barry, what do you mean? Burroughs Wellcome is who had owned AZT, the drug we've talked about, is presenting to doctors, not you, to doctors, the latest results from various clinical trials on AZT, and you have to get those results. I said, all right. He said, it will be okay. Just say you're Barry Gingell. I've called up. I'm sorry. That was Nathaniel Peer who did that. Okay. Or yet another AIDS doctor. I want to get his name. So Nathaniel called up and he got me the results. And died 6 months later. So that's the kind of pressure. But for those of you out there who might be like me, who fear the wiping away so much of what was good in our landscape, and not only that, taking away the means by which we could change things, you have RFK Jr. Have you read this? These things get nothing. 3 days ago, he decided there will be no public comment on clinical trials and a bunch of. I thought, what? This is the guy whose public comments when he was a maverick would have been the one thing he had to use, and he's going to take it away from everything else. Yeah. These people were not only anti-science, they are at their hearts certainly authoritarians, if not actual fascists.
So is there anything today?
I'm sorry.
I love hearing you talk.
These small circles, like those circles, are at least where you got to start. Yeah. Because like I said, and you may not even be able to start there yet. You may have to take care of yourself. Yeah. And I know a few other people, I had to the first few months after the election really just reestablish the other practices that I've talked about. Jim, breathing, writing, putting one of those 3 tragedies that I'd written through a serious rewrite and working like 4 hours a day on that and getting so much joy from that to just rekindle enough of the personal spirit that you're worthwhile to anybody else. But I think the first communal things we're going to do are going to be pretty narrow, or at least the most beneficial. I think we in New York can target the city and state in the way that we can't yet know how we can target the feds. But we have city and state government, and we gotta be smart in how we use them, and use them to supplement what we maybe won't be getting from the federal government, and to fight with lawsuits and other things, those things that legally we may be able to stop the federal government from doing with respect to immigration or ending certain kinds of health care or trimming Medicaid.
Wow.
I talk too much.
You do not talk too much. I love your voice. I love your point of view. And I would say, let's continue this conversation. I want to invite you back to this tub. How does it feel doing this talk with me?
That may be my phone and the other, my message. It's not important. I usually get messages from Spectrum telling me I could.
I just have to move my legs now.
Yes.
Sorry.
Not at all. You're in the awkward position. It feels fine, but I also, the one thing I said to you, I wasn't sure about this conversation. I think we're in a really, really grave time. And I didn't want to have to emphasize that so much. Let me touch.
Yes, please.
So much that I neglected to talk about the personal stuff that I've been able to do that has personally sustained me. And I think for all of you, you'll know a lot better what you can do. Maybe I'll give you a few ideas. But I still don't know if what I said can be much help at all, but I hope so. Because I didn't want this just to be Jim Eigo's personal reminiscence, because I've done enough interviews. Although we've had
Yeah, you usually don't talk about your penis in other interviews that I've seen, so I appreciate you doing that here.
Well, I wanted to stand up for the cultural value of having, and public space is disappearing, and public space for sex maybe has disappeared. I may have been the last generation to have had that to a significant degree, but I did, and I am here to testify there was a value in thinking of sexuality as publicly, culturally beneficial. It is pleasure-giving personally, but it works beyond that.
Oh yeah.
And the great writer Douglas Crimp, who was an art critic, he edited the important art magazine October for years and years, and he's written Mourning and Melancholy, which is one of the single most important essays on the first generation of AIDS writing. Douglas would always say that particularly whenever we were chastised for causing AIDS from heterosexual promiscuity, Douglas would turn around and say, the only reason ACT UP could get up and running within a few weeks and change the world, and I really mean this, within 2 years, within 2.5 years, changed the whole drug research and regulatory environment, was because we at first had sex networks. We were, in New York, we were a sex network. Like that or not, that's what we were. We just had to retool it to activism. And so I have seen firsthand sex as a cultural value because it also helped those of us who were transitioning from being bullied exiles and criminals or crazy because we were psychologically we were still being classified as crazy. So you take your choice. You're a criminal or you're crazy.
Or both back then.
Or both.
Yeah.
And so that idea of an affirming sexual network was how all of us transitioned from being the bullied exile in high school who was unsure whether they'd ever find a home anywhere in their life into having a mutually loving, pleasurable network.
Yeah.
We just had, like Doug would say, we just had to retool it to political activism and then to changing, becoming literate enough in clinical trials to be able to say, this is what a clinical trial minimally has to do in order to help us in the AIDS epidemic of 1987.
Wow. Wow. How are you feeling right now?
Good, thank you.
I want to thank you because your generosity, not just in this tub today, but the years of activism and creativity and sex positivity and contributions to our community and the health and wellness and pleasure of our community, I've directly benefited from. I know all my clients have benefited from. I know a lot of people watching this, whether you know it or not, have benefited from that blueprint that you were part of that created these conversations and pathways towards science, evidence, and pleasure and community. And I'm so grateful to you for this. I hope we can have more of these conversations. I have missed seeing you in recent years. I don't think we've even seen each other much since COVID.
It was so funny that we ran into each other yesterday.
It was like it was meant to be. But your voice, your energy is so valued by me. And again, I know a lot of people watching this have benefited from that blueprint that you created, that you were part of creating. Part of creating. Again, that blueprint.
Because we really were a group. The subcommittee of treatment and data correctly gets a lot of credit for this. But even before that, within ACT UP's issues committee, there was just like a group of about 5 of us. But we were working nonstop to get all the data we could and educate ourselves, and because we knew, because of the numbers of people who were dying, that we had to change the politics and then realize, oh my God, like that's not enough. We've also got to change science, or at least the way a drug goes from the test tube into people.
Yeah.
So that was a tall order.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how important the people. Let me just say this. Margaret McCarthy, David Kirschenbaum, and Gary Kleinman were 3 of my 4 best friends at ACT UP. We, to this day, and we only resumed this after coming back after COVID, and under, thank you David Kirschenbaum, under David Kirschenbaum's tutelage, we every 6 weeks or so have a lovely dinner together, because, and you don't go through that with people, and the people you like, you really do trust with your lives. And it's not seeing their limitations and their foibles. It's knowing them dearly and realizing, so much a part of that's really why I love them. And it's really why they are valuable. So we're going to have to live with a puppet I could do without. And if they slam the door, realize how ridiculously small that is compared to the enormous value that they, as the people only they can be, are, and in our case, have been to this movement. We were 5 or 6 or 7 of us doing this, and a few of us are dead now, and those of us who are alive are still going strong and loving each other.
Yeah.
So,
Beautiful.
I'm sorry.
For what?
I guess I thought maybe that was too personal, because they are. But maybe that isn't. It sounds corny, but in the end, it probably is love that sustains you. But it's love that's on many different levels. We tend to focus so much on romantic love or even sexual love, which I'm quite fine with focusing on. But that kind of collegial love that you feel, we used to talk about. Maybe that's what they feel in the foxholes and all that. But that kind of, the love that I talked about in an affinity group that can get arrested together. But I'm going to make sure that this person gets the HIV meds that person is taking, no matter how long they hold us. Things like that, but.
Earlier you mentioned Alexis's Rise and Resist group. If people want to know more about the protest or ways that they can be directly involved, would you recommend, or is that just for New York City, or is that around?
I only know it, but I think it's going around the world.
Okay.
And I've only been to 2 protests since the election of Trump. One was on his inauguration day, and that arose around, President's Day. And that arose around the world, here on a very frigid day in Union Square. So, I am sure there's stuff near you, but you probably, or I don't know where you'll be listening from, you are much more expert than I could ever be about your locales and your lives and how it might, I don't know how you do it, but it might be a play group that your kid is in, or there are just all sorts of ways that people have contact. One thing I do say is, like I said, the first thing is take care of yourself. And I do highly recommend that. But don't be afraid to reach out after that. Because nothing will sustain you like even in a struggle that's mostly political, like that certain collegiality that is made possible by a group of people that is fighting for a political cause that you believe is greater than all of you. And that can be love too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Jim, thank you so much. If people want to follow you, see your thoughts, do you want people to follow you on any platforms or any place people can keep up with you and see what you're thinking and feeling about what's happening?
Oh, I don't know. I am on Facebook.
Okay. Do you have a blog or a place where you write down your?
No, I do not.
Okay.
No.
So for now, Facebook. But if that changes or there's more areas, you'll let me know.
There is. I don't know its URL offhand, but if and when this endless session gets posted, I could, if there are comments under there, my plays are on National Play Exchange.
Wow.
But
Okay.
I can't remember what my particular page is. But I can. We
Great.
We
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking time, an extra time to be here and to hang out. and to
We
talk
better
about it.
end this, or Damon will never walk again.
I'm good.
He
I'm
has
good.
been crap
I'm good.
for a long,
I'm
long
good.
time.
It's worth it to see you, to talk with you, to hear you, and I hope we come back and talk more, especially because things are unfolding at a very rapid pace. And it, you know, for my mental health, part of taking care of myself is talking with you and hearing your thoughts and, you know, talking with people in this bathtub about what they are thinking and feeling and contributing toward surviving and perhaps even thriving through this mess that we are in. Thank you, Jim.
Yes. I don't know what we might do to thrive, but maybe that might be the closer. Keep your eyes open. I think this awful, awful period will also clear away so much that there will probably be opportunities to do things that we haven't yet thought about. You know, it really might be. But it's going to take goodwill, it's going to take communities of people, and it's going to take keeping your eyes open, observing, not feeding the ideologies you've already got, but thinking, all right, what is this landscape right now and what can we do? So
Beautiful.
I think we will thrive eventually. I just can't give anything like specifics yet. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you like this interview and you want to see more interviews about people that have and continue to help and change our world in a really healthy, sex-positive way, subscribe. There's a lot of interviews here from the past 4 years. And I think the one thing is that every person I've interviewed is doing something or considering a way to contribute to the world differently. And that, I think, is our resistance, and that's going to be our community, and that's our joy. That's how I see it anyway, but as Jim pointed out, we're going to see as this unfolds how we get through this. For now, thank you for watching, thank you for paying attention, and please, whatever you do, find a way to contribute something. It can be a protest, it can be a phone call, it can be a letter, it can be something, or as you said, just talking with your friends, talking with your partners, talking with your community about ways that we can survive this experience. Thank you, Jim. Thanks, everybody.